Greetings! Many of you will be seeing this talk on the Sabbath, so Shabbat Shalom to you. But whenever you're watching, we appreciate your interest in the instruction. I'm speaking in the month of January on the calendar in general use in the year 2021. Now next month, February, we'll be honoring Abraham Lincoln. And I read an interesting little tidbit about Lincoln and Douglas in the debates that they've had, the famous senatorial debates with Lincoln and Douglas in Illinois, and in the mid-19th century. And Douglas accused Lincoln of being two-faced. And Lincoln said, "If I were two-faced, would I be showing you this one?" He had a good sense of humor. And the sense of humor will help us at this time as I'm speaking. And on the other hand, we don't want to make light of the fact that these are troublous times, troubled times, really for many. And so this is a time, of course, to strengthen one another and to be very helpful and positive with one another during this time, and certainly to be very prayerful. I call this talk tonight a victory for a man of faith. A victory for a man of faith. Now, obviously, there is plenty of evidence for the existence of a supreme being, but nevertheless, as we interact with God, we have questions. There's some room for trust on our part. God has, in effect, programmed this into human existence, the need for faith. And faith, in effect, fills the gap. We do have evidence. We do have, certainly a lot of indications that not only is there a God, but that there's a God who intervenes in human affairs. On the other hand, there are these loose ends, one might say, and that is where faith comes in. And in Hebrews 11, faith is defined and discussed. Now, faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. For by it the elders obtained a good testimony. And I want to talk about one of those elders today, a hero of faith. And he's not mentioned here by name in this Faith Hall of Fame, but he's discussed. I want to go to Hebrews 11 and verse 33, talking about these elders, these people of faith, men and women. Verse 33, who through faith subdued kingdoms, worked righteousness, obtained promises, stopped the mouth of lions. Stopped the mouth of lions. Daniel, right? God is my judge, or God judges, meaning of his name, Daniel. He was a person who prophesied, but yet that was not his office. He had a secular office helping to administer the great empire, the Chaldean empire of Babylon, and then later the Medo-Persian Empire. He had a very important role in administering those empires. He had a secular role. He was of the royal family of Judah. So he is found in the Hebrew writings in the third portion of the Old Testament, in the Ketuvim, the Holy Writings, the Hagiographa. Although the Greek-speaking Jews put him in with the prophets, so you find him in most of your English translations after the book of Ezekiel. So Daniel was in a situation where he had to depend upon God to stop the mouths of lions. How did he get into that mess? He insisted on openly praying. At one time, that might have been considered a very extreme thing, but one thought came to mind from back in the 1960s. I was in the generation where we normally, in public school, began class with a prayer in the beginning of the day, and then the Supreme Court said, that's not to be done anymore. And so later on, there was a sketch on TV, a famous comedian. There's boys gathering together in the men's room, and they're on their knees, they're gathering together in a circle, and the teacher, stomps in there and says, "What are you doing?" So he says, "We're shooting craps, they're playing dice." So he said, "Oh, I thought you were praying." So maybe now we could understand how publicly praying can get you into trouble. But Daniel had his life on the line for openly praying. And of course, prayer is a very important part of Christian living. I want to go to 2 Thessalonians, the 5th chapter. 1 Thessalonians, the 5th chapter, and the 17th verse. We're told there, pray without ceasing. Prayer is a very important part of Christian living. And in the Psalms, in the 55th Psalm, we see here in verse 17, evening and morning and at noon I will pray and cry aloud, and he shall hear my voice. So we ought to set aside some time, evening, morning, and at noon, for prayer, talking to God, in a private situation where that can be done without distraction. So, but Daniel felt that he needed to confront this oppressive law that had been instituted against praying, and he was willing to do it in an open way where he could, in effect, be exposed. A tremendous courage that he had. Let's go to the 6th chapter of Daniel. This book was written in Aramaic, or rather this chapter, not the whole book, but certain of these chapters were written in Aramaic. So that means that even not only an Israelite or a Jew, in those days the northern tribes were pretty much, probably had already lost the Hebrew language, but the Jews continued to use the Hebrew language and were preserving scriptures in Hebrew. But now that we do have scriptures preserved also in Aramaic, which was the lingua franca of the Chaldean Empire, so that means a Gentile could read this account. It could be very widely circulated beyond just the Jewish community to the Gentiles. So in Daniel 6, let's get the historical background here. Daniel is captured from the land of Israel, from Judah. He's taken to what is today Iraq, and he's as a young man he's a captive, but he rises in rank. He becomes a very important force in that empire, and he leaves Judah in 606, and he possibly dies around 536. So he's possibly in his 80s when he dies. He comes as a teenager, as a captive, and then he lives on into his 80s. And at this point, he's in his 80s. It's around 538 BC. The Babylonian Empire, or the Chaldean Empire, based in Babylon, the Neo-Babylonian Empire, has been conquered by the Medes and Persians. But now, Daniel's talent is such that now the Medes and Persians are utilizing him in their new empire. And so that has superseded the earlier one of the Chaldeans. So now we're in around 538 BC, and we have Daniel as an old man, an old wise man, close to God, who has a gift of prophecy. He was a very talented person and very loyal to his government, loyal to his people, of course, loyal to his God above all, but also a very loyal servant of his government. It pleased Darius to set over the kingdom. Now, who's this Darius? This is Darius the Mede. And scholars have questioned who this Darius the Mede was, and some identified him with a commander named Gobrius or Ugbaru. And in the past, I have thought that perhaps he ought to be identified with Cyaxares II. And now, as I get older, it seems that is the best option. So once again, I'm in effect in the camp of Cyaxares II, but we can resolve that maybe at another time. It pleased Darius to set over the kingdom 120 satraps to be over the whole kingdom, and over these 3 governors, of whom Daniel was one, that the satraps might give account to them, so that the king would suffer no loss. He's ruling, in a sense, in conjunction with Cyrus. Then this Daniel distinguished himself above the governors and satraps because an excellent spirit was in him, and the king gave thought to setting him over the whole realm. So it was kind of like Joseph in Egypt. He could never run the country, but he could be, the next best thing, so to speak. So the governors and satraps sought to find some charges against Daniel concerning the kingdom, but they could find no charge or fault, because he was faithful, nor was there any error or fault found in him. So there was politics going on here, and when it comes to politics, one way of dealing with somebody is if he's in some way different, and therefore maybe suspect. And obviously, if you're a Jew in the Medo-Persian Empire, you're a suspect. And frankly, that's been the case for Jews throughout history. Later on, as we go through the history of the Medo-Persian Empire, we come to the time of Xerxes, and I'll go to Esther, the 3rd chapter, and in the 16th verse and the 8th verse of Esther 3. What does Haman tell Ahasuerus here about the Jews? This is Esther 3:8. Then Haman said to King Ahasuerus, Ahasuerus in the Hebrew, and it comes from probably Xerxes, which is the Persian, which is the Greek version or the Americanized version of the Greek version of the Persian name, if that makes sense to you. Then Haman said to King Ahasuerus, there is a certain people scattered and dispersed among the people in all the provinces of your kingdom. Their laws are different from all of other peoples, and they do not keep the king's laws. Therefore, it is not fitting for the king to let them remain. This has been, of course, the problem, with the Jews over the centuries. Anti-Semitism, which really is ultimately anti-God. The Jews have a tradition about Haman. He claimed that these Jews, they have too many holidays, and so an angel said they're going to have another one because of you, and so we have Purim today. But anyway, let's go now to the destiny of Christians in the same way. If you're a committed Christian, you're going to have pressure at times. People are going to say, "Oh, come on, why are you such a holy Joe," or whatever they call you. Why are you so, stiff? Or, why don't you go along with this or that or the other thing? You're going to be pressured to do wrong if you're a Christian, if you're a committed Christian. And depending on where you are, it could be a lot worse. You could be departing from the general consensus on what's doctrinally correct, and at times in history that is extremely dangerous. In 2 Timothy 3 and verse 12, well, I'm in 1 Timothy. I want to go to the second book of Timothy, the second letter that Paul wrote to Timothy in the 3rd chapter and the 12th verse, and he says, yes, and all who desire to live godly in Christ Jesus will suffer persecution. So realize, if you want to maintain God's standards, if you want you to live your life according to the Bible, there are times you're going to come head to head with whatever, maybe the gang wants to do or doesn't want to do, or what society is pushing you to do or not to do, etc. So this is the situation with Daniel. His being a Jew made him more vulnerable. So let's go to verse 5. This is Daniel 6:5. Then these men said, we shall not find any charge against this Daniel unless we find it against him concerning the law of his God. So he evidently had a reputation as being one who consistently followed God's law. So these governors and satraps thronged before the king and said thus to him, King Darius, live forever. Now I don't know about this man. Let's say Cyaxares too, but you could imagine that a ruler in that period could have had quite an ego, because there was so much power that they were able to exercise. And I have noticed over the years that people with a great ego, they can be manipulated by flatterers, by people can get around them and manipulate them. I've seen that. And this seems to be what's going on here. They're appealing to his sense of greatness. All the governors of the kingdom, the administrators and satraps, the counselors and advisors have consulted together to establish a royal statute and to make a firm decree that whoever petitions any god or man for 30 days except you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions. Now, that's a very extreme obviously kind of thing. But unfortunately, those kind of abuses have occurred over the centuries, under various tyrants. Now, O king, establish the decree and sign the writing so that it cannot be changed, according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which does not alter. So they were really excited to have him sign this decree, because once having signed it, he couldn't evidently revoke it so easily. Therefore, King Darius signed the written decree, and I guess he figured it's only for a month, and maybe it's a way of unifying everybody. After all, this was an empire recently formed, recently expanding, and perhaps he felt this would help unify the region under his control. Now, when Darius knew that the writing was, when Daniel knew that the writing was signed, he went home, and in his upper room, with his windows open toward Jerusalem, he knelt down on his knees 3 times that day, as I read to you earlier, and prayed and gave thanks before his God, as was his custom since early days. And he prayed facing Jerusalem, which has been the custom among Jews over the centuries. Jerusalem, of course, was where the central sanctuary existed, the temple, the first and second temples, and it's where God will establish his capital in the Messianic age. And it's interesting, you find this verse in Daniel 6 and verse 10, and I like to match it with Matthew 6 and verse 10. Let's go to Matthew 6 and verse 10, and here Jesus tells us that when we pray, in verse 10 of Matthew 6, we pray, your kingdom come. Your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And so we are looking towards God's kingdom. And in effect, that's what Daniel was doing in a symbolic sense, praying facing Jerusalem. Of course, we're looking forward to Jerusalem as it will be in the millennium, and then after to the New Jerusalem that you find in Revelation. Let's go now to Daniel 6:11. Then so evidently it says he had his window open toward Jerusalem. So it doesn't seem like he was really he was in a private situation, but it didn't seem like he was going undercover or really doing a lot to conceal what he was doing. It seemed that he felt that he ought to challenge this head on. It's tremendous courage. Somehow he had the faith that this needed to be dealt with. This was just so wrong, such an oppressive law, and of course it would have affected his entire community. Now that I think of it, when I was reading this earlier, I was thinking about Daniel, but think about the whole Jewish community that was being impacted by this. So he was in effect standing for the whole community. Then these men assembled and found Daniel praying and making supplication before his God. Then they went before the king and spoke concerning the king's decree. Have you not signed a decree that every man who petitions any god or man within 30 days, except you, O king, shall be cast into the den of lions? The king answered and said, the thing is true, according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which does not alter. So he's, building a trap for himself, not realizing it. So because he thought very highly of Daniel. So they answered and said before the king, that Daniel, who is of the captives from Judah, right, it does not show a due regard for you, O king, or for the decree that you have signed, but makes his petition 3 times a day. This reminds me of a verse in Genesis 40 that when Joseph is brought before Pharaoh. See if I can find it quickly. Okay, Pharaoh has a dream. I'm in verse 41. Okay, and then we go to verse 10. I'm going to go, verse 12, okay? This is Genesis 41:12, when Joseph is introduced to Pharaoh's court. The butler introduces him, the chief butler, in verse 12. Now there was a young Hebrew man with us there. And so the Jewish tradition is, he kind of played up his the fact that this guy was young, a young Hebrew man, and a servant also of the captain of the guard. Pardon me. So he was a slave, he was young, and he was Hebrew. 3 strikes against him, and yet he had the right answer. So here we have again Daniel's background is brought out. He's of Judah. Joseph, of course, was Joseph. Judah was his brother, and the Jews descended from Judah and other brothers, and of course Joseph, his descendants became Manasseh and Ephraim, the peoples of the northern kingdom. But anyway, let's go back. I hope I haven't confused you with that. Let's go back to Daniel, the 6th chapter. And so, verse 13. So they answered and said before the king that Daniel, who is one of the captives from Judah, does not show due regard for you, O king, or for the decree that you have signed, but makes his petition 3 times a day. And the king, when he heard these words, was greatly displeased with himself, and set his heart on Daniel to deliver him, and he labored till the going down of the sun to deliver him. So he's trying to find some loophole, some way to override that law. And I guess in the time allotted, he didn't come up with any solution. Then these men approached the king and said to the king, "Know, O king, that it is the law of our Medes and Persians that no decree or statute which the king establishes may be changed." So this is a conspiracy, against Daniel. It's a plot. So the king gave the command, and they brought Daniel and cast him into the den of lions. But the king spoke, saying to Daniel, "Your God, whom you serve continually, he will deliver you." And the king, I can't analyze what he was thinking, but I suspect it was just partly he was certainly hoping this would happen. I don't know how strongly he believed it. He may have believed it somewhat because of Daniel's past, and certainly it's what he was hoping for. But Daniel, as I said, courageously stood for really the entire Jewish community, which was worshiping the God of the Bible, and wasn't going to stop for a whole month. Then a stone was brought and laid on the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet ring and with the signets of his lords, that the purpose concerning Daniel might not be changed. So he was forced to go along with this, and he, of course, very reluctantly did so. Now the king went to his palace and spent the night fasting, and no musicians, or there's other ways to translate that, I guess, but anyway, no entertainment, no musicians were brought before him, and his sleep went from him. So he was very troubled, couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, didn't want to have any pleasurable activity. Then the king arose very early in the morning and went in haste to the den of lions. So no doubt he was very upset. A man who was his most faithful servant, loyal to him, not one who would backbite against others like the others were doing. His most talented and loyal man, was for no reason losing his life. So he hoped that the God that Daniel served would intervene for him, because this is what got Daniel in trouble, because he wanted to serve his God. So would his God now honor that and intervene? And the king was hoping and maybe even expecting yes. Anyway, verse 20. And when he came to the den, he cried out with a lamenting voice to Daniel. The king spoke, saying to Daniel, "Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to deliver you from the lions?" Then Daniel said to the king, "O king, live forever." Now it's interesting that Daniel remained loyal to the king, even though look at what the king did to him. But he realized the king had been tricked into it and tried and couldn't find a way out. Really didn't want this to happen. But certainly he remained loyal to the king. And of course this would have been the right thing to say anyway for him. Then Daniel said to the king, "O king, live forever. My God sent his angel and shut the lions' mouths, so that they have not hurt me, because I was found innocent before him, and also, O king, I have done no wrong before you." So he reminded him, I'm a righteous man by God's standards, but On the other hand, as an employee, and a subject, I've been very faithful and very effective for you. Now the king was exceedingly glad for him and commanded that they should take Daniel up out of the den. So Daniel was taken out of the den, and no injury whatever was found on him because he believed in his God. A tremendous miracle. And, that God performed for Daniel. Very inspiring, very encouraging for all of us who read it. And the king gave the command that, and they brought those men who had accused Daniel. And this is, the Asians have this concept of karma. The Jews have this tradition of midah keneged midah, measure for measure. So what they wished for Daniel, now they got. The king was extremely angry. He was so angry, he wanted those people wiped out, and with no future either. He wiped out their entire families. No future for those people at all. And the king gave the command, and they brought those men who had accused Daniel, and they cast them into the den of lions, them, their children, and their wives, and the lions overpowered them and broke all their bones in pieces before they ever came to the bottom of the den. Even as they were, heading, I guess it was on a slope of some sort, and as they got down to where the lions were, lions came up and got them before they even got there. So you see the contrast. They are immediately devoured as quickly as possible, whereas Daniel spends the night there and not a scratch on him. Then King Darius wrote to all peoples, nations, and languages that dwell in all the earth, peace be multiplied to you. And as I said, this passage, this whole chapter is in Aramaic, and so therefore a general audience could read it, not just members of the church. Peace be multiplied to you. Verse 26 now, I make a decree, that in every dominion of my kingdom men must tremble and fear before the God of Daniel. So, whatever your religion, but you must respect Yahweh. You must respect the God whom the Hebrews worship, Elohim, and he has various names, as we know. The God of Daniel. This is in Aramaic, so we have the word Elah or Elaha. For he is the living God and steadfast forever. Daniel, of course, has the name of God in his name, Daniel. It's a name that has the name of God in it. I make a decree that in every dominion of my kingdom, men must tremble before the God of Daniel, for he is the living God and steadfast forever. His kingdom is the one which shall not be destroyed, and his dominion shall endure to the end. That's, of course, a very important theme of the entire book of Daniel, the kingdom of God and the future of humankind to be ruled by God and the resurrected saints, ruled by Jesus Christ when he returns, and by the resurrected saints. Verse 27, speaking of God, of the God of Daniel, Darius the Mede writes, says in this proclamation, he delivers and rescues, and he works signs and wonders in heaven and on earth, who has delivered Daniel from the power of the lions. And so this elderly man lives on, continues to live on, and perhaps, dies in his late 80s during the reign of Cyrus. So verse 28, so this Daniel prospered in the reign of Darius and in the reign of Cyrus the Persian. For a while it was a joint reign, and then I think at some point Cyrus becomes very much the dominant figure. So this chapter is very inspiring, very interesting to read, and it shows us a great victory of a man of faith. And if we keep reading, we see Daniel's ultimate destiny. In the end of the book, what God says to Daniel. In Daniel 12, very end of the book, verse 13. But go your way, God says to Daniel, till the end. So he had a lot of prophecies that he was inspired to record, but yet he wouldn't, some of them were for thousands of years later. So God tells him, but you, go your way till the end, for you shall rest, and will arise to your inheritance at the end of the days. So he tells Daniel, you're going to die before the coming of the kingdom of God to earth, but you're going to be resurrected. He promises that. And he will be a part of God's kingdom. He will be among the kings and priests ruling in God's kingdom. But you go your way till the end, For you shall rest and will arise to your inheritance in the end of the days. And along with him will be the Apostle Paul of the tribe of Benjamin. Let's go to 2 Timothy 4 and verse 7. Here Paul says about himself in this letter to the evangelist Timothy. Paul, this is 2 Timothy 4:7. I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith. Finally, there is laid up for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, like Daniel, God is judge. The Lord, the righteous judge, will give to me on that day, and not to me only, but to all who have loved his appearing, to Paul, to Daniel, and I hope and pray to us, as we think about a victory of a man of faith. All the best to you and yours.